Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning back in, I guess. A lot of you have been messaging me, asking me questions about all this information that I'm sharing, which I'm super grateful. Always know that you can leave the comment here. I would always appreciate if you can just hit the like button or maybe subscribe the podcast so I would know that it's beneficial for us to continue on this journey. One of the questions that I got and was, what is the reason? Like, what is your intention behind this podcast? I would say, even to call it a podcast is kind of difficult because for me, I'm just sharing the information that I know has to be shared, right? Not in any weird way, but in a way of why no one is talking about that. And I do believe that in my short life so far, I noticed that every time when you introduce this really, really complex information in a very, very simple manner, just through the conversation, people have a tendency to take it and people have a tendency to start adjusting themselves even by hearing this information. So for me, it's like I want so many people to be able to understand how the complexity of their system can be analyzed and how do we actually work with these complex systems constantly, this multi-layered, multi-dimensional being that we are. So the intention behind that is just to give you guys resources, give you an understanding that there are ways to understand, decode the systems, and work with the systems. And that actually very much aligns with today's topic. And today's topic is going to be about informational layers of our human system. As you probably notice, I'm always trying to keep these episodes pretty much short because I want you to be able to listen to it when you are walking on the treadmill, when you're walking outside, when you're walking your dog, when you're working out. I really want it to be pretty short and condensed so you can actually understand and know if that's the topic that I have to double click on, as I always say, because we all have different topics, different interests, and for some of you, I actually noticed that the mental body video was very, very interesting. For some of you, emotional body was way more important. For some of you, physical bodies, quantum anatomy, right? And we all have different preferences and different understanding. What is my entry point to my healing? So I want to introduce this idea for you. There is this quantum field that everyone is talking about. Is it simple? Absolutely not, but we will try to make it simple. We're all made of informational layers. Those informations have different densities, right? As we talked, emotional body density, mental body density is completely different than physical body's density. You know that your physical body is very strong. You know that your physical body is dense, not that easily movable. It's a little more easier to move magnetic layers of our system, right? Emotional or mental layers or energetic layers. The question is still, how quickly would that informational movement translate into the physicality? Because we all want to see the effect on the 3D reality. We all want to see the effect in our physical body. And we have to understand that this is where the true physics actually begin, to actually knowing what is the best entry point to adjust the physicality. And all these layers, they are informational. In every layer of your system, in your physical body layer, in your emotional body layer, in your mental body layer, in your subtle anatomy and energetic layers, there are so many informational layers. Every layer is bounded by its own laws, regulations. You know how we say behavioral consent. Sometimes people imagine that it's like, if I don't give permission for something to happen, it won't happen. In my opinion, it's a pretty delusional way to go through life. Is it helpful to be actually aware and give your permission when you want to give your permission? Yes, absolutely. You should have your boundaries. You should state those things. But there's a thing called behavioral consent. If I walk into the shopping mall, no one is going to ask me what kind of song I want to listen. Since I'm in the mall, this is the song that it's playing. And behavioral consent actually applies to every informational layer of you. In my practice, and I want to introduce this idea here, I've been noticing the same patterns over and over and over again. Every single person, every single being is different, but we all have a lot of patterns. And once we learn how to track those patterns, we can understand how those informational layers are actually participating in our co-creation of reality, how they sometimes withholding us, and how they sometimes can help us to actually adjust our life in the way that we're trying to adjust it. So, the more I work with people, the more I'm noticing that any type of condition, symptom, disease starts for three main reasons. And it's very, very simple. It sounds very simple, but I'm just introducing you this theory, okay? So, number one, too much information. How do you know that the system has too much information? Well, you guys call it toxins, viruses, mold, and anything external that can enter your system. We know that if any virus or toxin enters your system, you're not going to like it. You will feel that flow of too much information. Your body will signal that via symptom, whether it's fatigue, whether it's fever, whether it's even more difficult symptom. But any type of additional information in the informational layers of your container will create some distortion. Your body obviously can have the capacity to deal with it, and every single body has the capacity. Unfortunately, a lot of us, we are functioning just below the threshold, where any additional information entering the system, whether it's a supplement, whether it's a toxin, a virus, a pharmaceutical, an additional energy work, anything additional can cause the disruption in the informational layer. So that's number one reason. Number two reason, depletion of information. When we have someone who doesn't have an organ, right? For a reason, obviously for a valid reason most of the time, right? No one tries to just eliminate the organ. We always try to save them as much as we can. But if there's any type of elimination in the system, when we have amputation, when we have elimination of the organ, when we have certain depletions after surgery, let's say, we can see that if there's a lack of information, well, the system will have to rearrange. Some symptoms of that rearrangement will happen most likely. You might notice them. They might be very, very quiet. They might be pretty loud. So it depends on the system, on the capacity of the system, how quickly it can rearrange and bounce back. So far we have two reasons for the diseases, symptoms, disbalances, diagnoses, however you want to call it. Too much information in the system, in between informational layers, depletion of information of the informational layers and in between them. And the third reason is a hijacked information. When we talk about, I call it hijacked information because usually there are events in our lives that a lot of times people call them traumas, right? They can hijack the informational layer of the cell. Certain events are too much for our current reality to actually handle, for our current psyche to handle. Then it will leave the mark, right? And obviously when we talk about the trauma, please don't think that any trauma is sexual abuse or physical abuse or severe emotional abuse. There's a thing called accumulative traumas where drop by drop by drop by drop, very, very low-grade behavior can actually traumatize your body. There are those traumas that goes from 0 to 100, and there are those traumas that goes by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they can accumulate in 5, 10, 20 years. Once that reaches the certain threshold, your body perceives us as a trauma. That hijacks the information layers of yours. Any unexpected thing that happens, any traumatic events that happen, any invasion, it can have hijacking effect for your information layers. Since we know probably and remember from the first video about physical body's anatomy, quantum anatomy of the physical body, we remember that physical body has this very, very good tendency to copy-paste cells. It's the most energy-saving way. That's not going to change anytime soon. It's still the most energy-efficient way. The body is always moving in a way that preserves the most amount of energy. Obviously, if we would probably have a little different lifestyle, we would have a little wider bandwidth. We don't. We are exhausted, most of us. We are overworked. We are tired, mentally, emotionally. We're traumatized. Fill the blank. So body will continue to having this copy-paste behavior. In biology, we call it mitosis in the physical body. So imagine every time when the informational layer is hijacked, well, your body is still replicating the same over and over and over and over again. It's just a matter of time when those affected informational layers will translate into any type of condition, symptom, or behavior that you don't like. Those informational layers can have too much information, depleted information, or hijacked information in any layer of your existence. It can happen in your physical body, it can happen in your emotional body, it can happen in your mental body. You know how you feel when you kind of open your eyes and you're like, oh damn, I've been manipulated, this whole relationship has been mental manipulation. And then you start seeing how much of that actually impacted you. Well, the informational layer of the mental field got hijacked. Again, over time, you start seeing the effect in your body. So everything has those informational layers. Those informational layers are very, very old structures of existence and reality in general. They apply to your system, they apply to any living organism that you encounter. And how many living organisms there are, I do question, and I do think that a lot of organisms are living that we don't classify them that way. But that's for another time. So this is exactly where we're entering the phase where Newtonian physics cannot help us, right? We're in the phase where we need those quantum principles. We need the understanding how the information flows, not only from the Newtonian perspective. And quantum physics really helps us to understand that there is entanglement, there is a superposition, there's always a way to recreate those informational layers. There is always a way. Sometimes that way is long, unpleasant, destabilizing, and all that you can imagine in your inner healing journey, right? Not, you know, it has some prerequisites who actually enters the self-healing journey on those informational layers, right? And prerequisite, one of the main ones is like, you have to be okay with discomfort. I never say that it has to be worse before it gets better. I don't buy into that. But I know that the way that physics works, before everything stabilizes, before everything goes back into like actual healthy way, there is this destabilization phase. There is the phase where identity collapses. There is a phase where all the old emotion surfaces. And we have to be ready to go through it. And not everyone is. But this is exactly what we mean when we say divine timing, right? Everyone has the pacing and the timing, and things happen exactly in the way that they have to. Because sometimes the healing idea can sound really, really beautiful and almost exotic and like, absolutely, I want to do this. Well, some layers of your system, some informational layers can be depleted to the point where there is no place of adjusting. We have to make sure that we actually rebuild the informational layers before we can build anything on top of it. And as you probably notice, usually healing work is about A, eliminating, B, about adding anything on top. But these two routes might not be beneficial if we're actually not addressing the informational layers of the system. We don't know the foundation then. We don't know how strong the foundation is. And can we actually pile anything on top of it? Or do the system actually have enough energy and ability to recalibrate if we try to destabilize it? Because again, don't be surprised if healing comes with any type of destabilization. Those informational layers will be the ones that will have to bounce you back. This is exactly what stands behind after, wait, what is the recovery of the system? Who gives the input of my system to start recovering or going into the rest mode or actually pushing? Who is that? Like, where is that layer? And these are the informational layers that exist around every single cell, around every single layer on the body of yours, right? And those informational layers can be really, really easily affected. They can be affected by people that you're spending time with. They can be affected by energetics around you. They can be affected by politics and socioeconomic status of anything that you are doing. It touches your information layers. So we have to be very careful and gentle because we have to know that that system will need to bounce back. That system will need to function. So how can we do that in the most sustainable way? And I'll tell you this, catharsis is usually not the most sustainable way. Usually when we're looking for the most sustainable way, it's not the most pleasant way. It's not the quickest way for sure, but that is the sustainable way. Because in the multidimensional medicine, we always want to keep in mind, how do informational layers look like? Do they actually have enough information? Or maybe we have some additional information that has to be eliminated. Or maybe we have some information that it's so depleted that we have to rebuild the foundation before we try to build anything in that system. Or sometimes we meet people that informational layers are so hijacked that they cannot hold any additional information. Then we need to do the healing on the mental, emotional, magnetic layers of the system. And every single system has to be assessed and looked from the informational layer perspective, because that gives you an idea, what is the next step? What is the actually entry point for that specific system? As we talked, and I mentioned that before, and I will keep mentioning that, physical body doesn't have enough ways to share what it's actually going through. I can have the peak of anxiety in my system today. Whether it's coming from something that happened 5 years ago, that it was very, very significant for my system on this day, totally possible that my body remembers. And that hijacked information around the mental layer can actually activate anxiety. Maybe I had an uncomfortable conversation with someone. Body can translate that as anxiety. Maybe I had a meal that my body was not able to digest last night. That would translate as anxiety. So if we are treating just one symptom, and I gave you just 3 examples, there are millions of entry points that would translate as anxiety. Those informational layers allows us to understand what is the entry point. Because before we know the entry point, we don't know how to actually help. A lot of times people want to feel better, and like, absolutely fair, we all want to feel better. But sometimes that has to be paused for a second while we understand what is actually informational layer condition. And obviously we don't talk about acute conditions, right? In acute conditions, please go and seek help. But if there's a chronic, deep layered condition, we want to understand the informational layers of it. And we're talking about mental, emotional patterns, we're talking about the energetics, we're talking about everything that you can imagine. Everything has those informational layers, and every layer can be healthy, every layer can be hijacked, every layer can have too much information, whether it's like mental beliefs that your mom planted in you, right? That's too much information on the mental informational layer. Whether it's emotional body, right? Whether it's depletion of information because you've never been able to experience joy, or maybe accumulation too much information in the anger cup. All these things, they contribute to your overall multidimensional health. And in that, we have to understand that informational layer will have to be measured, adjusted, and actually invited in participation now healing. Because I really notice in people that I'm working with that once we actually have a stable foundation on the informational layer, the system responds way easier. There are way more opportunities. How can we adjust the system? There are way more ways. How can we help that person? But know that this is why that multidimensional quantum aspect is actually even participating in this conversation, because those laws, those regulations, and that support is necessary to touch the informational layers of the system. Again, it's a very, very complex topic that I tried to introduce in the last 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out privately, as you guys been doing so far. You can leave a comment here. I will always try to answer those. And we can start discussing deeper and deeper and deeper into informational layers, because this is something that I want people to understand, that it does very much participate in all that you're experiencing. And my goal here is to help you understand what actually participates in all that you're experiencing and how to decode that. And maybe, if we're lucky, how to adjust that. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and I'm here for any questions.